Hi guys, so we're going to be talking about transformations of the absolute value function specifically, but this relates to all transformations of all graphs that we'll eventually do throughout the year. So as far as your definitions go, you need to know what a vertical translation is, a horizontal translation, and a reflection. A vertical translation is known as our D value, and you'll see what we mean when we talk about a specific equation, but it's when the graph shifts up or down along the y-axis. So you would say there's a vertical shift up 4 units, which means that the graph moves up 4 units. For a horizontal translation, that's known as your C value. So when the graph shifts left or right along the x-axis, so that moves the graph horizontally along your x-axis, which might be said something along the lines of you have a horizontal shift to the right 5 units. When we talk about reflections, if we have a negative x, that means that it's a reflection over our x-axis, which is different than a negative x, which is a reflection over the y-axis. Notice that one has parentheses and one does not. The one that does not would be that there's a set of parentheses with just the x value, either parentheses or absolute values, but it's outside of the function that we're talking about, whereas this one for the y-axis is inside the function that we're talking about. So for our VIX, you need to know our main general equation, which is y equals a times the absolute value of bx minus c plus d. Each of these have different meanings, a, b, c, and d, but we're solely going to be talking about c and d today. This is a chart that's going to help us set up what our values used to be compared to what they're going to be after we do and go through these transformations. So you always start with x and y in your middle. Those are specific points from your original graph of y equals the absolute value of x. These can change for any graphs that we talk about, but we're focusing on absolute value. So you would have points similar to what we've already talked about for absolute value of negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, and 2. And when you substitute in your x values, the absolute value of negative 2 is positive 2, the absolute value of negative 1 is positive 1, the absolute value of 0 is 0, 1 is 1, and 2 is 2. So those are the values that we're always going to start with, and we're going to see where those get shifted, whether it's a vertical translation, or a horizontal translation, or if there's going to be a reflection. So outside the parentheses are your A and D values. So your A values could also be an indication if there's a reflection over the x-axis. So if you see a negative outside where A is, that means that you have a reflection over your x-axis. When we have a number for D, that's going to be a vertical shift up or down. If D is positive, we're going to shift up. If D is negative, we're going to shift down. If it's inside the parentheses, this is kind of where it becomes a little more tricky. So you have B, which is the inside. So if you see a negative on the inside, that's a reflection over the y-axis. And C, which is a horizontal shift left or right. So for C, if we have something like x minus 4, that actually is a shift to the right, and we'll explain that later on in class. If we have x plus 3, that's going to be a shift to the left. It's kind of opposite of what you're thinking, of what your brain's trying to process. When we put all this together, it helps us move our graph and transform it into different ways. So here's an example. So for example 1, determine the transformations for the equation y equals negative the absolute value of x plus 4 minus 2, and then we also want to graph it. So our transformations kind of go in order of how we see them. The first thing that we see is a negative. So that means that we have a reflection over the x-axis because it's outside the parentheses. Then we see this plus 4. So the plus 4 means that I have a horizontal shift to the left 4 units, which means my graph moves to the left 4 units. Then you have a vertical shift down 2 units because of our negative 2. So that also goes back to what we were talking about with our vertex. Your vertex that you're going to point out is going to be negative 4, negative 2. And that's one of the points that you're going to kind of confirm when we do start graphing this. So when you set up your chart, you always have your x and y, which we've already gone over. Now here, because we have a negative, this is going to multiply, because we're multiplying here, negative 1 times all of this. So negative times our y values. So we take the 2 and multiply it by a negative 1. So we change all of our y values. So 2 becomes negative 2, 1 becomes negative 1, 0 becomes 0, 1 becomes negative 1, 2 becomes negative 2. Now we also have a minus 2, which goes back to our D value. And again, that's on the outside of our parentheses, so I'm only working with this side first. And now I'm going to subtract 2 from this column. So you always want to make sure that you're using the column right before. So negative 2 minus 2 is negative 4. Negative 1 minus 2 is negative 3. 0 minus 2 is negative 2. Negative 1 minus 2 is negative 3. And negative 2 minus 2 is negative 4 again. So we're all set for our outside, our parentheses. But inside, we have this plus 4. So again, it's that opposite of what you want to try and think of. So we're going to subtract 4. So you're taking the column beforehand, and that's going to be negative 2 minus 4 is negative 6. Negative 1 minus 4 is negative 5. 0 minus 4 is negative 4. 1 minus 4 is negative 3, and 2 minus 4 is negative 2. Now you'll see that there's these orange kind of columns that outline. This becomes your new x value, because this is on our x side. So these are all my new x coordinates, and these are all my new y coordinates. And they form this graph when you plot them. So you have the point negative 6, negative 4. So you go over negative 6, down negative 4. Negative 5, negative 3. So you go over negative 5, down negative 3. Negative 4, negative 2. So over negative 4, down negative 2. And so on and so forth for each of these points, which creates your graph here. Now we also talk about our vertex was negative 4, negative 2. This is a way to confirm that. So we went to the left negative 4, left 4 units, down 2 units, which gives us our vertex. But we also had that reflection. So our normal absolute value graph looks like this. And we want to make sure that we reflect it over the x-axis. We moved it left 4 and down 2. So that's our result.